Dr. Norton, thanks for joining us. Your teachings of Ruth.
Mm-hmm.
Why Ruth? What brought you to Ruth?
So more broadly, as a womanist biblical scholar, my work is interested in foreign women. So because my womanist biblical interpretation is concerned about where do race, class, and gender intersect in the text, because race is a 19th century construct, you're not seeing direct correlation. So then the question becomes, how are communities formed in the Bible? And when they're formed, who it belongs and who doesn't belong? And so I was really fascinated about this Ruth story, which is often like it's the most preached church on text in Black churches, like on Women's Day and Mother's Day. And so I'm constantly hearing people preach Ruth, and I had preached Ruth. And then as I sat as a scholarly endeavor and interrogated the text, I thought, oh, there are all kinds of things that we miss.
Right.
And we talk about this relationship between these two women as if there's no ethnic difference that divides them.
Yeah.
And we create a fairy tale about the conclusions that come at the end of the text that are based on our own needs and desires, rather than an understanding of the social and political situation that undergirds and surrounds this text.
Right. So would you say a lot of the teachings in institutions are sort of romanticized?
100%.
Yeah.
I think the church absolutely romanticizes that story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the lectures you taught was on womanist exegesis, trauma in the book of Ruth. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, so again, in thinking about the ways that we don't acknowledge the difference that happens, the entire beginning of the story is a trauma narrative, right? So on its surface is a literary composition. Naomi and her family experience famine. There's some sense, if you look at rabbinic readings in the Talmud, that their experience of famine would have been different than the rest of Bethlehem. That the reason that they're able to leave and go to Moab is because they have means when other people don't. So we don't know how they experience the famine on a day-to-day level, but we do know that they leave. So there's that initial moment. But there's also this moment for Naomi that very quickly in the narrative, her husband dies and her two sons die. So we're immediately drawn to some kind of sympathy for her. We should be drawn to some kind of sympathy for Ruth and her sister-in-law, Orpah. But it's also the case because they've also lost their husbands. They don't have sons. We know about the world of the ancient Near East, much like our own world, that women who are not attached to men are vulnerable.
Right. And
so they've all experienced a kind of trauma. So that's for me, the basic literary trauma. What sits beneath that is that, in my opinion, the Ruth text is likely a post-exilic text. So it reflects a time period for ancient Israel where they have experienced likely the Babylonian Empire coming in and sacking Jerusalem. Right. And the people have been exiled into Babylon. And so these are people who have experienced Assyrian domination, Babylonian domination, and are now experiencing Persian domination. So when you are experiencing trauma, you write trauma. And so that's part of what I talk about, is that there is some trauma that undergirds this that needs to be talked about. And then it sits throughout the text. And so I think, particularly as a Black woman, I have a complicated relationship with Naomi, because what we see in this material is that Ruth makes this vow, and it's essentially an assimilationist vow. Wherever you go, I'll go. Whatever you do, I will do. I'm going to forsake my own people for you. And Ruth is looking for something that Naomi never gives her, right? Like the text doesn't say, oh, Naomi rejoices in this. It says that Naomi was silent. And then when they get to Bethlehem, the women of Bethlehem say, blessed be Naomi. And Naomi says, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. So Naomi in Hebrew actually means sweetness. Mara means bitter. So don't call me sweet, call me bitter. She says, because the Almighty has brought me back empty. And so if I'm Ruth, I always joke to my students, if I'm Ruth, I'm thinking, what about me? What about this vow that I've just pledged to you for security and provision and all of these things?
Right.
So all of that is a trauma response. And part of what I argue is that we get through this entire narrative of Ruth, and the very thing that Ruth is looking for, belonging with Naomi, belonging with the people of Bethlehem, never actually happens.
Right.
Because at the end of the narrative, the women say, "Blessed be Naomi, for the Lord has given her a son." And so there's just these women of Bethlehem bookend this time in a way that suggests that no matter what Ruth has done, she will get some belonging, but she will never be fully included in this community. And so for me, I'm really interested in what does it mean for Black women to constantly be asked to hold up multiple communities that never reciprocate that kind of care.
Right. And constantly being asked to be resilient.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
And the one thing you never get in that story is anything about Ruth's emotions. You get a sense of Boaz's emotions, you get a sense of Naomi's emotions, but there's never a sense of like, ooh, Ruth was sad.
Right.
Ruth was afraid. And so it feels, as a Black woman, that feels very similar.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like this is a stupid question. Did Ruth write? Who wrote Ruth?
We don't know who wrote Ruth.
Okay.
Ruth did not write Ruth. It's literacy was a tricky thing in the ancient Near East.
Right.
So less than 1%, and we don't have any evidence of women in this time writing.
Right.
My guess, my assertion is that the text is written by a scribe who is responding to the scribes, the writers of Ezra and Nehemiah. Because if we look at Ezra and Nehemiah, there are several texts that say you're not supposed to marry foreign women because they won't raise. So Israelite men are not supposed to marry foreign women because religious education and the raising of children is the responsibility of the women, and so the idea is that these women won't raise these children in the way of Yahweh.
Right.
And so if you really look at that vow that happens in chapter 1, it's almost a direct response, right? Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. And so it's a part of that debate. Can you marry foreign women?
That's really interesting. Because like you said, literacy was less than 1%. So who knows what women were literate and were able to write. So it makes you think it's probably most likely that a man.
Oh, it's
100%.
100%. Yeah. The scribal class was male. And you have in this time, you have to think about the fact that kings weren't literate, right? Like this is not simply a socioeconomic issue.
Right.
It's part of it, but it is, there was a specific class of people who wrote things. So how the orality of the text evolved is one question, but in terms of who pulled this narrative together, it would have been a man.